November 18, 1953, 7:30 in the evening. The cabin stands in darkness at Deep Creek Lake, Maryland, isolated among the trees. Inside, 12 men gather around a wooden table. The fire crackles. Outside, the temperature drops to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. Frank Rudolph Emanuel Olson, 43 years old, bacteriologist, sits among colleagues from Fort Detrick's Special Operations Division. He doesn't know that in exactly 9 days, 18 hours, and 25 minutes, he will plunge from a 13th floor window in Manhattan. Sidney Gottlieb, the CIA's chief chemist, watches from across the table. His hands are steady. In his briefcase lies a small vial of lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. After dinner, he will pour it into the Cointreau. 8 of the 10 men will drink it. None will be told. The cabin's isolation is deliberate. What happens here must remain secret. The Cold War has turned inward. The enemy is no longer just Soviet agents. It is the American mind itself, waiting to be conquered, controlled, erased. The glasses clink. Someone laughs. In 72 hours, Frank Olson will attempt to resign from his position. In 9 days, he will be dead. This is not speculation. This is documented fact. Every word that follows is true. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. There's a lot of interesting stuff ahead. April 13, 1953. Central Intelligence Agency Headquarters, Washington, D.C. The Director of Central Intelligence, Alan Welsh Dulles, signs the authorization for Project MKUltra. The project codename joins 149 sub-projects that will eventually involve over 80 universities, prisons, hospitals, and pharmaceutical companies across 3 continents. Sidney Gottlieb, 35 years old, becomes the architect. Born with a club foot and a stutter, brilliant in chemistry, he has spent years studying poisons. Now he has authorization to study human minds. The project's stated purpose? Develop methods of controlling human behavior. The unstated purpose? Create techniques to extract information, erase memories, implant false personalities, and destroy resistant subjects. The budget? Over $10 million. In today's currency, approximately $87.5 million. Gottlieb establishes a simple principle. The end of experiments will be kept secret. The means will be kept more secret still. Subjects will not know they are subjects. Consent is an obstacle to be avoided. In 1951, 2 years before MKUltra's official start, Gottlieb approached pharmaceutical companies. The CIA attempted to purchase 10 kilograms of LSD from Sandoz Laboratories in Switzerland. 10 kilograms equals 100 million doses. The rationale? Prevent other countries from controlling the supply. The experiments had already begun under different names: Project Bluebird, Project Artichoke. Now they would expand under MKUltra's umbrella. Gottlieb hired allies: Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron in Montreal, George Hunter White, federal narcotics agent in San Francisco and New York, researchers at universities who believed they worked for legitimate foundations, the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology, the Geschichte Fund for Medical Research, front organizations, all funded by the CIA. The subjects would be people who could not fight back, as one agency officer would later testify: prisoners, mental patients, drug addicts, prostitutes, the unwilling, the unknowing, the expendable. By April 1953, the machine was ready. All it needed was bodies. Camp Detrick, Maryland, 1953. The U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratories occupy 300 acres. Scientists work in sealed chambers, developing weapons from invisible enemies: anthrax, tularemia, brucellosis. Frank Olson works here. As Deputy Acting Chief of the Special Operations Division, he holds security clearances granting access to classified programs. He knows about biological warfare testing. He knows about interrogation techniques being developed. He knows too much. His colleagues describe him as troubled. In the summer of 1953, he witnessed something during a trip to Europe. The details remain classified, but his behavior changed afterward. He spoke of wanting to quit. His wife Alice noticed his distress. "He told me he had made a terrible mistake," she would recall decades later. "But he couldn't tell me what." In November, Vincent Rouet, Olson's supervisor and head of the Special Operations Division, organized the Deep Creek Lake Retreat. The gathering was routine, senior staff discussing sensitive projects away from the office. What happened there was not routine. After dinner on November 18th, Sidney Gottlieb or his deputy, Robert Lashbrook, spiked the Cointreau with LSD. 8 men drank it unknowingly. 20 minutes passed. Then the drug took effect. Some men laughed uncontrollably. Others became paranoid. Frank Olson's reaction was severe. He became increasingly agitated. When the men were finally told they had been drugged, Gottlieb revealed it as if it were a joke. Olson did not find it amusing. "You had no right," he said, his voice shaking. "No right." 3 days later, on November 21st, Olson attempted to resign. His superiors refused. Instead, they decided he needed treatment for his reaction to the drug. The machine had identified its malfunction. Now it would attempt a repair. Or a disposal. November 22nd through November 27th, 1953, New York City. Frank Olson, accompanied by Robert Lashbrook and Vincent Rouet, visits Dr. Harold Abramson, an allergist who had conducted LSD research under CIA contract. Abramson is not a psychiatrist. His specialty is allergies. But he has clearance. He asks Olson questions. Olson speaks of being followed, of danger, of things he cannot reveal. "They're watching me," Olson tells the doctor. "They know what I know." Abramson prescribes bourbon and Nembutal. The treatment continues over several days. Olson's condition worsens. On November 25th, he throws away his wallet and identification in the street. "I don't need these anymore," he says. Lashbrook never leaves his side. Later, George Hunter White's diary will reveal that he was also involved, watching over Olson on CIA orders. But on the night of November 27th, White had to leave the city to care for his mother. He left stewardship of Olson to Jacques Voignier, also known as Pierre Lafitte, a member of Union Corse working for the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. November 28, 1953, 2:25 a.m. The Hotel Statler, room 1218A, 10th floor. The night manager, Armand Pasteur, hears glass shattering. A body hits the pavement outside. He runs out. Frank Olson lies on the sidewalk, his body broken. Blood pools beneath him. His eyes are open. Pastore runs back inside, takes the elevator to the 10th floor. He enters room 1218A. The window is broken, the shade is drawn. And sitting on the toilet, in his underwear, is Robert Lashbrook. "He's gone," Lashbrook says. Pastore asks what happened. Lashbrook cannot or will not provide clear answers. He makes a phone call. The hotel operator later testifies she overheard him saying, "Well, he's gone." The voice on the other end replied, "That's too bad." Both men hung up. The police investigation is brief. No autopsy is ordered. The death is ruled a suicide. The body is placed in a sealed casket. Alice Olson is told her husband fell or jumped, two very different things, after a nervous breakdown. She is discouraged from viewing the body because of severe facial disfigurement. The funeral is held 2 days later. Alice receives an expedited pension. The case is closed. For 22 years, this is all the family knows. Frank Olson jumped or fell. A tragedy, a mental breakdown, nothing more. But the broken window tells a different story. So does the drawn shade. So does the absence of cuts that should have been present if Olson crashed through closed glass. So does the blow to the head discovered during the 1994 exhumation, a hematoma on the left temple consistent with being struck before falling. Frank Olson didn't jump. He didn't fall. He was eliminated. Operation Midnight Climax, 1955, 225 Chestnut Street, San Francisco, California, Telegraph Hill. The apartment overlooks San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz Island, and the Bay Bridge. George Hunter White decorates the bedroom. French Toulouse-Lautrec posters of can-can dancers, red muslin draped over lamps, a refrigerator stocked with pitchers of martinis. Behind the bedroom wall, a two-way mirror. Behind the mirror, a portable toilet and surveillance equipment. White, 50 years old, Federal Bureau of Narcotics agent, has worked for the CIA before under his alias Morgan Hall. Sidney Gottlieb hired him specifically for this project. White's assignment? Test LSD and other drugs on unwitting American citizens in real-world settings. The methodology is simple. White pays prostitutes $100 per target. The prostitutes lure men from nearby bars to the apartment. Once inside, the men receive drinks laced with LSD. White watches from behind the two-way mirror, martini in hand, sitting on his portable toilet, taking notes. Microphones disguised as electrical outlets record every word. Hidden cameras film every action. The goal? Determine whether LSD and sex can be used to extract information or compromise targets. The men never know they're being drugged. They experience terror, hallucinations, paranoia. Some believe they're going insane. Some vomit. Some weep. White nicknames LSD Stormy because of the chaos it creates. In his diary, White describes his work with enthusiasm. He writes of fun, fun, fun. In a letter discovered later, he elaborates, "Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?" The experiments expand. Additional safe houses open in Marin County and New York City. CIA operatives begin dosing people in restaurants, bars, beaches. If the agency is scared of a drug, they send it to San Francisco to test on civilians. The prostitutes are given immunity from arrest. They become government employees, sex workers on the CIA payroll, delivering American citizens to be drugged and studied. One participant later recalls entering the apartment, drinking a cocktail, then experiencing what he describes as the walls breathing, colors melting, sounds becoming shapes. He remembers a voice asking him questions. He remembers answering, though he doesn't remember what he said. When he wakes the next morning in an alley, he has no identification, no wallet, no memory of how he got there. He never reports it. Who would believe him? Operation Midnight Climax continues from 1955 until 1965. 10 years. Hundreds, possibly thousands of men. No official count exists. In 1963, a CIA Inspector General stumbles upon the safe houses during a routine audit. He raises objections. The operation scales back but doesn't completely stop until 1965. George Hunter White retires that year. He moves across the Golden Gate Bridge to Stinson Beach, becomes the local fire chief. He dies in 1975 from cirrhosis of the liver, shortly after the first congressional hearings expose MKUltra's existence. The apartment at 225 Chestnut Street is eventually sold, renovated, converted into a luxury residence. It sells in 2015 for over $10 million. The listing describes the location as delightfully quiet. The ghosts of the men who were drugged there remain silent. The Montreal experiments begin. 1957. January, Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Ravens Crag Mansion on Mount Royal. The building houses the Allen Memorial Institute, McGill University's psychiatric facility. Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron, 56 years old, Scottish-born psychiatrist, arrives each week from his home in Lake Placid, New York. He is president of the American Psychiatric Association, first chairman of the World Psychiatric Association, member of the Nuremberg Medical Tribunal that judged Nazi doctors. His credentials are impeccable. His reputation is international. Sidney Gottlieb identified Cameron as ideal for Subproject 68. Cameron's research focuses on de-patterning and psychic driving, techniques to erase existing personalities and rebuild new ones. The CIA channels $69,000 to Cameron through the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. Cameron believes the funding comes from a legitimate research foundation. He doesn't know the money originates with the CIA. He doesn't know his work is classified as a military weapon program. Or perhaps he doesn't want to know. Cameron's theory? Mental illness results from patterns of destructive behavior. If these patterns can be erased, the mind can be rebuilt from scratch. Schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, all can be cured by destroying the diseased personality and installing a healthy one. The patients who arrive at Allen Memorial seeking treatment for depression or anxiety disorders have no idea they're entering a laboratory. Step 1. Depatterning. Cameron places patients in drug-induced comas lasting days, sometimes weeks. The longest recorded? 86 days. He administers massive doses of electroconvulsive therapy, 30 to 40 times the normal voltage, multiple times per day. He injects patients with curare, a paralytic drug. He adds LSD, sodium pentothal, and other hallucinogens. The goal? Reduce the patient to an infantile state, destroy their memories, erase their identities. Jean Steele enters the Institute in 1957 seeking treatment for postpartum depression. She is a young mother. She wants to feel better. She wants to care for her children. Cameron puts her in the sleep room. She will remain there for months. Her daughter Allison later describes what her mother became. She would sit in the dark. She would write codes on the walls. She couldn't remember her children's names. She couldn't feed herself. We had to toilet train her again. She never came back. The woman who returned was not my mother. Step 2. Psychic driving. After depatterning destroys the mind, Cameron attempts to rebuild it. He places patients in isolation chambers, forces them to listen to recorded messages played on loops for 16 hours per day. Negative messages. You are weak. You are worthless. You have failed. Then positive messages. You are strong. You will succeed. You will be well. Some messages repeat hundreds of thousands of times. One patient hears the same sentence repeated 400,000 times over several weeks. The headphones are taped to patients' heads. They cannot remove them. They cannot escape the voices. Even in sleep, the messages continue. Cameron describes his method in published papers. He presents it at conferences. He believes he's making breakthroughs in psychiatry. His colleagues at McGill praise his innovative approaches. The patients' families notice the devastation. Their loved ones return home unable to walk, unable to speak coherently, unable to remember basic facts about their own lives. Many never recover. By 1964, Cameron has treated approximately 80 patients through his depatterning and psychic driving programs. Most suffer permanent psychological damage. None gave informed consent. None were told they were subjects in CIA-funded experiments. None knew their minds were being deliberately destroyed to test interrogation techniques. Cameron dies on September 8, 1967, from a heart attack while mountain climbing with his son. He destroys his personal files before his death. No evidence remains of his awareness of the CIA's involvement. The CIA's Kubark Counterintelligence Interrogation Handbook, published in 1963, cites Cameron's research extensively. The techniques he developed become standard CIA torture protocols. The Prisoners. Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, Georgia, 1957 through 1963. Dr. Carl Pfeiffer runs LSD experiments on inmates. The prisoners volunteer in exchange for reduced sentences. They're told the research seeks a cure for schizophrenia. This is a lie. James Joseph Bulger, 28 years old, serving time for bank robbery, volunteers on Christmas Eve, 1957. He's eager to participate. He writes letters to his brother William describing how excited he is to help science, to earn good time toward early release. He receives high doses of LSD 3 times per week. After 3 months, the frequency increases. The experiments continue for 15 months. Bulger later describes the experience in a notebook. Horrible LSD experiences followed by thoughts of suicide and deep depression. I developed a morbid fear of LSD. I felt if I had any more of it, it would push me over the edge. He compares the doctor to a modern-day Dr. Mengele, the Nazi physician. He writes, "I was in prison for committing a crime, and they committed a greater crime on me." The hallucinations never stop. For the remaining 60 years of his life, Bulger experiences vivid hallucinations for approximately 2 hours every night when falling asleep. He develops chronic stomach problems. He fears having children, believing the LSD has damaged his chromosomes and any children he fathers will have severe mental disabilities. In 2013, a jury convicts Bulger of involvement in 11 murders, extortion, racketeering, and drug trafficking. He had never killed anyone before participating in the MKUltra experiments. After the experiments ended, he became one of Boston's most violent criminals. One juror, Janet Ular, later states, "Had I known about the LSD experiments, I would have absolutely held off on the murder charges. His brain may have been altered, so how could you say he was really guilty?" Bulger is beaten to death by inmates at Hazleton Federal Prison, West Virginia, on October 30, 2018. He arrives in a wheelchair. He is 89 years old. No charges are filed against his killers. Lexington, Kentucky, Federal Addiction Research Center. The experiments here focus on African American prisoners, many serving time for drug offenses. Dr. Harris Isbell runs the program. The methodology? Prisoners addicted to heroin are offered morphine and heroin as payment for participating in LSD experiments. The prisoners, desperate to avoid withdrawal, agree. One patient receives LSD every day for 174 consecutive days. The purpose: determine if continuous administration of massive doses can permanently alter consciousness or destroy the mind entirely. The patient's name is never recorded. The results of the experiment are never publicly released. What happened to this individual remains classified. Other prisoners receive LSD for 40 consecutive days. Some receive doses 1,000 times stronger than typical recreational amounts. The goal? Find the threshold at which the human mind breaks irreparably.
Many prisoners develop lasting psychological damage. Some experience chronic flashbacks. Some develop permanent psychosis. The CIA classifies these outcomes as acceptable losses in pursuit of weaponizing LSD for interrogation. Vacaville State Prison, California, 1960s. Dr. Arthur Nugent conducts experiments on inmates. The methods include LSD administration combined with electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, prolonged isolation, and exposure to strobe lights and white noise at damaging volumes. One prisoner, whose name remains redacted in declassified documents, describes being placed in a completely dark, soundproof chamber after receiving LSD. The experience lasts 72 hours. When released, he cannot remember his own name. It takes weeks to recover basic cognitive function. Prison officials later defend the experiments, stating, "Inmates consented to the procedures in exchange for reduced sentences. They understood the risks." But the consent forms are vague. They mention medical research and experimental treatment. They don't mention CIA involvement. They don't mention that the goal is not treatment, but the development of interrogation techniques to be used on enemy combatants. The prisoners are told they're helping science. In truth, they're being used to perfect methods of psychological torture. The children are rarely mentioned in official documents. Their existence is a footnote, a brief reference in congressional testimony, a single sentence in declassified memos. But they existed. Mentally disabled boys at a state school in Massachusetts. Their names are not recorded. Their ages range from 10 to 17. CIA-contracted researchers administer radioactive oatmeal to study nutrient absorption. Later, they add LSD to test reactions in developing brains. The boys' parents or guardians sign consent forms, but the forms don't mention radiation. They don't mention hallucinogenic drugs. They mention only nutritional research. One boy, identified in records only as Subject 12, receives LSD on 14 separate occasions over 6 months. After the 4th dose, he becomes uncontrollably violent. After the 8th dose, he stops speaking entirely. The experiments continue regardless. The final report notes, Subject 12 exhibited extreme behavioral changes. Further study required. Subject 12's current status, unknown. His medical records were destroyed. Tulane University, New Orleans, Louisiana. Dr. Robert Heath receives CIA funding to study electrical brain stimulation combined with psychoactive drugs. His subjects include children diagnosed with severe behavioral disorders. Heath implants electrodes directly into children's brains. He then administers LSD while stimulating various brain regions. The purpose? Determine if pleasure centers can be activated artificially to create compliant, controllable subjects. One child, a 13-year-old boy identified only by the initials RM, receives implants in 4 brain regions. Over 3 months, Heath conducts 47 sessions combining LSD with electrical stimulation. RM's mother later describes her son's transformation. He came home different. He would scream at night. He would hurt himself, hitting his head against walls. They said the treatment would help him. Instead, they destroyed him. RM dies at age 19. The cause of death? Suicide. His medical files note, chronic psychological trauma of unknown origin. The electrodes are never removed from his brain. CIA documents reference juvenile subjects in experiments conducted at unnamed institutions between 1954 and 1962. The total number of children involved, classified. Their identities, classified. Their current status, classified. In 1977 congressional testimony, CIA Director Stansfield Turner acknowledges that some research involved minors. When pressed for details, he states, "The specific information regarding juvenile participants is not available. Those files were destroyed in 1973. Senator Edward Kennedy responds, "Destroyed? These were children, American children, and you destroyed the evidence?" Turner replies, "Senator, I can only work with the information that exists. What no longer exists, I cannot provide. The children remain footnotes. Their names are gone. Their suffering is classified." The destruction of evidence. June 19, 1973. CIA Headquarters, Langley, Virginia. Director Richard Helms issues an order. Destroy all MKUltra files. The timing is not coincidental. The Watergate scandal has erupted. Congressional investigations loom. The CIA anticipates inquiries into illegal domestic operations. Helms decides certain secrets must disappear. Sidney Gottlieb, now retired from the CIA, supervises the destruction. For weeks, documents are shredded, burned, erased. Boxes of files vanish. 20 years of research, experiments, results, subject identities, institutional partnerships, reduced to ash. But the destruction is incomplete. Some files survive by accident. Financial records stored in the budget and fiscal section are overlooked. 7 boxes of documents escape the purge, misfiled and forgotten. These survivors become the only physical evidence of what occurred. Everything else, the detailed experimental protocols, the subject consent forms, or lack thereof, the medical results, the identities of victims, is gone. When investigators finally discover MKUltra in 1975, they find a program with almost no documentation. Gottlieb and Helms have successfully erased most evidence of their crimes. But survivors remain. Human survivors. People whose lives were destroyed. Their testimonies, their medical records, their permanent psychological damage, these cannot be shredded or burned. The government will claim the experiments were aberrations, mistakes made during a different era. They will claim oversight failures, not intentional atrocities. They will claim that little of value was learned, that the programs were shut down, that such things could never happen again. All of these claims are lies. The Rockefeller Commission, June 6, 1975. The Rockefeller Commission, investigating illegal CIA activities, publishes its report. Buried on page 369, in a section marked Testing of Drugs on Unwitting United States Citizens, appears a brief paragraph. As part of a program to test the influence of drugs on humans, research included the administration of LSD to persons who were unaware they were being tested. This was clearly illegal. One person died in 1953, apparently as a result. No name is given. No details are provided, but the Olson family recognizes the date. Alice Olson, now 70 years old, reads the paragraph 3 times. Her husband died in November 1953. A fall from a hotel window. They told her it was suicide. They told her he had a nervous breakdown. They never mentioned drugs. She contacts the CIA. After several weeks, the agency confirms the unnamed scientist is Frank Olson. The story reaches newspapers. The New York Times publishes it on page 1. The Washington Post follows. Within days, the Olson family receives a phone call. President Gerald Ford wants to meet them.
July 21, 1975. The Oval Office. President Ford, with CIA Director William Colby present, apologizes to Alice Olson and her children. He expresses the government's regret. He offers financial compensation. The government settles for $750,000. The Olson family signs away their right to sue. They're told this is closure, but it isn't. The apology doesn't explain how Frank died. It doesn't reveal what he knew that made him dangerous. It doesn't acknowledge the possibility of murder. It maintains the narrative, a tragic accident caused by an experimental drug given without consent. The payment is hush money disguised as compensation. The apology is a legal maneuver disguised as contrition. Eric Olson, Frank's son, spends the next decades investigating his father's death. In 1994, he has the body exhumed. A forensic pathologist, Dr. James Starrs, conducts a new autopsy. The findings? No facial disfigurement as originally reported. No cuts consistent with crashing through a closed window. But there is a hematoma on the left temple, a wound consistent with blunt force trauma before the fall. Dr. Starrs concludes, "I'm skeptical that anyone could clear a radiator, a 31-inch high windowsill, pass through a 3-by-5-foot window opening obscured by a drawn shade, all in the darkness of a hotel room at night. It's not inconceivable that someone could have broken the window after he went through to make it appear as if he had gone through a window as a crazy person would." The New York District Attorney reclassifies Frank Olson's death from suicide to unknown circumstances. In 2002, Eric Olson makes a public statement. The death of Frank Olson on November 28, 1953 was a murder, not a suicide. Frank Olson did not die because he was an experimental guinea pig who experienced a bad trip. He died because of concern that he would divulge information concerning a highly classified CIA interrogation program. The government never responds to this accusation. The case remains officially closed. Frank Olson is still dead. The truth is still classified. The Senator from Massachusetts, August 3, 1977. Dirksen Senate Office Building, Washington, D.C., Room 1202, 9:07 in the morning. Senator Daniel Inouye, Chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence, opens the joint hearing with the Subcommittee on Health and Scientific Research. Senator Edward Kennedy sits beside him. The room is packed. Journalists fill the gallery. Camera flashes illuminate the senators' faces. 2 years ago, Kennedy begins, the Senate Health Subcommittee heard chilling testimony about the human experimentation activities of the Central Intelligence Agency. The deputy director of the CIA revealed that over 30 universities and institutions were involved in an extensive testing and experimentation program which included covert drug tests on unwitting citizens at all social levels, high and low, Native Americans and foreign. He pauses. His voice hardens. The intelligence community of this nation, which requires a shroud of secrecy in order to operate, has a very sacred trust from the American people. The CIA's program of human experimentation of the 50s and 60s violated that trust. It was violated again and again. Admiral Stansfield Turner, Director of Central Intelligence, takes his seat at the witness table. He is flanked by CIA lawyers and officials. His prepared statement acknowledges MKUltra's existence. He calls the program unfortunate and inappropriate. He emphasizes that it ended years ago. Senator Kennedy interrupts. "Admiral Turner, we believed that the record, incomplete as it was as complete as it was going to be." Then one individual, through a Freedom of Information request, accomplished what 2 United States Senate committees could not. He spurred the agency into finding additional records pertaining to the CIA's program of experimentation with human subjects. Kennedy holds up documents.
These new records were discovered by the agency in March. Their existence was not made known to Congress until July. The records reveal a far more extensive series of experiments than had previously been thought. 86 universities or institutions were involved. New instances of unethical behavior were revealed. Turner shifts in his seat. Senator, I can only report on what we've found. The bulk of MKUltra records were destroyed in 1973. What survived was discovered in our financial files. We've provided everything we have. Everything you have, Kennedy repeats, but not everything that existed. Not everything the American people deserve to know. The testimony continues for hours. CIA officials describe experiments with LSD, electroshock, sensory deprivation. They admit to testing on prisoners, mental patients, addicts, prostitutes. They admit to using unwitting subjects. They admit that procedures violated the Nuremberg Code, but they can't, or won't, provide crucial details. How many people were involved? Unknown. How many institutions participated? Approximately 86, but possibly more. What were the results of the experiments? Most data was destroyed. Were any deaths caused? Besides Frank Olson, they can't say. Senator Schweiker asks, "Can you assure this committee that all programs of this nature have been terminated?" Turner responds, "Senator, I can assure you that nothing similar to MKUltra is currently being conducted by the CIA." Schweiker presses, "That's not what I asked. I asked if all programs of this nature have been terminated, not just MKUltra." Turner pauses. "I can only speak to what I know, Senator. What I don't know, I cannot confirm or deny." The hearing reveals the scope of MKUltra. 149 sub-projects, over 7,000 servicemen and women used as test subjects, thousands of civilians experimented upon without their knowledge or consent, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of dollars paid to universities and institutions to conduct illegal research. But the hearing also reveals what's missing: the destroyed files, the classified secrets, the victims whose names are redacted or lost, the experiments that left no documentation because they were too illegal, too brutal, too damning to record. At the hearing's conclusion, Kennedy makes a statement. "We are left with a fragmentary record. It is clear that the government was sponsoring research which it knew to be illegal and unethical. It is clear that lives were damaged, perhaps destroyed. What is not clear is the full extent of that damage. And that, I fear, we may never know." The cameras flash. The journalists scribble notes. The CIA officials gather their papers and leave. Nothing changes. No one is prosecuted. No criminal charges are filed. The victims receive no compensation beyond the Olson settlement. The institutions involved face no consequences. The doctors who conducted the experiments continue their careers. The hearing is described in newspapers as a historic reckoning. In truth, it is theater, a performance of accountability without actual accountability. The government admits to crimes, expresses regret, and continues as before. MKUltra is officially over, but its techniques live on. The Interrogation Manual, 1963. The CIA publishes a classified document, Kubark Counterintelligence Interrogation Handbook. The name Kubark is a CIA cryptonym for the agency itself. The manual compiles techniques developed through MKUltra research. It draws extensively from Donald Ewan Cameron's work on sensory deprivation and psychic driving. It references experiments conducted at McGill, Kentucky, Atlanta, and other sites. The manual's introduction states, "This handbook is designed to provide guidelines for interrogators working with resistant sources in custody situations." Resistant sources means prisoners who refuse to cooperate. Custody situations means detention centers, often in foreign countries where U.S. law doesn't apply. The manual describes psychological torture methods. Sensory deprivation. Results produced only after weeks or months of imprisonment in an ordinary cell can be duplicated in hours or days in a cell which has no light, which is soundproofed, in which odors are eliminated. The CIA learned this from Cameron. His patients, placed in isolation chambers, regressed to childlike states within days. The technique works. It destroys the personality rapidly. Induced debility. Keep prisoners in uncomfortable positions for extended periods. Limit food and water. Disrupt sleep patterns. After 72 hours without sleep, cognitive function collapses. The prisoner becomes suggestible, compliant, broken. The CIA learned this from monitoring prisoners given prolonged doses of drugs. The threshold for psychological collapse is approximately 3 days of total sleep deprivation. Self-inflicted pain. Design situations where the prisoner must choose between two painful options. Hold arms extended for hours, either endure muscle failure or lower arms and face punishment. The prisoner inflicts suffering on themselves through the choices they make. The CIA learned this from Cameron's psychic driving experiments. When patients couldn't remove the headphones playing torturous messages, they experienced guilt for not being able to escape. The guilt compounded the psychological damage. The manual emphasizes, these techniques must leave no physical scars. Psychological torture is preferred because it's deniable. A broken mind doesn't photograph well. A traumatized prisoner can't show proof of abuse. MKUltra's legacy isn't the development of a mind-control drug. LSD failed in that regard. People under its influence become unpredictable, not controllable. MKUltra's real legacy is the perfection of psychological torture. The CIA learned how to destroy human consciousness systematically, scientifically, repeatably. Cameron's patients taught them how much electroshock a brain can endure. The Kentucky prisoners taught them how much LSD causes permanent psychosis. The Atlanta inmates taught them how long continuous dosing creates lasting damage. The children taught them how developing brains respond to trauma. Every victim contributed data. Every destroyed life became a data point. Every broken mind proved a hypothesis. The Kubark Manual is distributed to CIA operatives worldwide. It's used in Vietnam, Latin America, Middle East, Southeast Asia, anywhere the CIA operates black sites. In 2004, during the Iraq War, photographs emerged from Abu Ghraib prison. Prisoners subjected to stress positions, sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation, sexual humiliation. The techniques are familiar. They're from the Kubark Manual. They're MKUltra techniques, repackaged for the war on terror. Pentagon officials claim the Abu Ghraib abuses were the work of a few bad apples. They claim no official policy authorized torture. They're lying. The policy was written in 1963. The research was conducted from 1953 to 1973. The victims taught the CIA everything it needed to know. MKUltra never ended. It just changed names. The Canadian Reckoning. 1980, February 12th, Canada. CBC television broadcasts the Fifth Estate episode titled The Sleep Room. For the first time, Canadian citizens learn what happened at the Allen Memorial Institute. Survivors appear on camera. They describe the treatments. They show their medical records. They speak their names. Linda McDonald was treated by Cameron in 1963. She entered the institute suffering from mild depression following childbirth. Cameron diagnosed her with paranoid schizophrenia, a diagnosis her previous doctors had never mentioned. She underwent depatterning, 63 days in a drug-induced coma, 102 electroshock treatments at 40 times normal voltage. Then psychic driving, recorded messages played continuously for 2 months. When released, Linda couldn't recognize her husband. She couldn't remember her children's names. She had to relearn basic motor skills, walking, feeding herself, using the bathroom. Her memory extended back only to age 6. Everything else was erased. On camera, Linda speaks calmly. "I went in for postpartum depression. I came out not knowing who I was. They destroyed me to cure me. Except I wasn't cured. I was destroyed." The broadcast triggers a national scandal. Other victims come forward. Jean Steele's daughter describes her mother's transformation. Rita Zimmerman explains how Cameron's treatment turned her from a functioning adult into a dependent child. By year's end, over 100 former patients have identified themselves as Cameron's victims. They form a support group. They hire lawyers. They demand compensation. In 1984, the United States sends a formal apology to the Canadian government. But the apology includes a request. Don't share details of MKUltra with the former patients seeking compensation. Protect the program's classified information. Canada complies. The government releases minimal information. It claims ignorance. Officials didn't know the CIA was funding Cameron's work. The Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology appeared legitimate. How could they have known? The victims file lawsuits. The cases drag through courts for years. The Canadian government defends by claiming it had no legal responsibility for Cameron's actions. Cameron was an independent contractor. The government only provided grants. They didn't direct his research. In 1986, lawyer George Cooper releases a report finding that government officials were not fully aware of Cameron's experiments. The report recommends compensation on compassionate and humanitarian grounds, not legal liability. Translation: pay the victims to make them go away, but admit no wrongdoing. In 1988, Canada agrees to settle. $100,000 per victim. 127 victims accept the settlement. To receive payment, they must sign non-disclosure agreements preventing them from discussing the case or criticizing the government. 77 other victims are rejected. Their symptoms don't meet the narrow criteria established for compensation. They received nothing. The CIA never compensates the Canadian victims. The United States government claims sovereign immunity. Canadian citizens can't sue a foreign government for actions taken on Canadian soil with Canadian government approval. In 1998, a television miniseries airs based on the Montreal experiments, The Sleep Room. It dramatizes Cameron's techniques. Viewers are horrified. The show wins awards. In 2017, 60 years after the experiments began, the Canadian government reaches another out-of-court settlement with the daughter of a victim. $100,000. In exchange, she signs a non-disclosure agreement and drops all claims. No formal apology ever comes from Canada. No monument commemorates the victims. No official investigation fully documents what occurred. The Allen Memorial Institute continues operating. The building where the experiments took place, Ravenscrag Mansion, has been demolished. A parking lot occupies the site. The Senator's letters. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, Senator Edward Kennedy's office receives letters from people claiming to be MKUltra victims. hundreds of letters, then thousands. Most are impossible to verify. The CIA destroyed the records. Without documentation proving someone was a subject, their testimony is just an allegation. Some letters describe credible experiences. A woman from California writes that in 1958 she volunteered for a depression study at a university. She received injections and pills she was told were vitamins. For weeks afterward, she experienced vivid hallucinations. The university has no record of her participation. The researcher she names died in 1972. A man from Florida writes that during military service in 1962, he and other soldiers were dosed with substances that made them violently ill. They were monitored for days, asked questions repeatedly, denied sleep. When he requested his military medical records decades later, the relevant pages were missing. A woman from Texas writes that her brother, institutionalized for mild schizophrenia in 1959, became catatonic after electroshock treatments at a state hospital. He never recovered. He died in 1993, having spent 34 years in a vegetative state. His medical files note participation in innovative therapy research, but provide no details. These letters all share common elements: memory loss, unauthorized treatments, missing records, destroyed evidence. The victims want acknowledgement. They want the government to admit what was done to them. They want compensation. They receive form letters in response. Thank you for contacting Senator Kennedy's office. Without documentation proving participation in specific CIA programs, we cannot verify your claims. We encourage you to submit Freedom of Information Act requests to the CIA for any records that may exist concerning your case. The victims submit FOIA requests. They receive responses: no records found, or records destroyed in 1973, or records classified for national security reasons. The loop is perfect. Without records, no proof. Without proof, no compensation. Without compensation, no acknowledgement. The government's position: if we have no documentation, it didn't happen. But it did happen. The victims know what was done to them. Their families witnessed the transformations. Their medical records, when they exist, show unexplained gaps, contradictory diagnoses, treatments that don't match standard protocols. In 1995, President Bill Clinton establishes the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments to investigate government radiation testing. MKUltra victims testify, hoping for recognition. Valerie Wolf, a therapist, brings clients who claim they were used as children in CIA experiments. They describe being taken from their families, brought to laboratories, subjected to drugs and abuse, then returned home with no memory of what occurred, until years later when fragmented memories began emerging. The committee listens politely. Their final report mentions MKUltra briefly, but focuses primarily on radiation experiments. The victims' testimonies are noted, but not investigated further. The pattern repeats: testimony without investigation, acknowledgement without accountability, apology without compensation. By 2000, most MKUltra victims are elderly or deceased. Their children contact senators, seeking recognition for their parents. They receive form letters. We appreciate you bringing this to our attention. However, without documentation, the victims die. Their stories die with them. The government outlasts its accusers. The scope revealed. When the 7 boxes of MKUltra financial records were discovered in 1977, they revealed a program far larger than previously admitted.
149 sub-projects conducted across decades involving institutions worldwide. The records show payments to 86 universities and colleges across the United States and Canada, Harvard, Stanford, Cornell, McGill, University of Rochester, Johns Hopkins, and dozens of others. Professors at these institutions received CIA funding through front organizations. Most didn't know the money came from intelligence agencies. Some did, and proceeded anyway. 44 hospitals and medical centers, including Veterans Administration hospitals, psychiatric hospitals, addiction treatment centers. Patients seeking help became experimental subjects. They trusted their doctors. Their doctors betrayed them to the CIA. 15 prisons, federal and state facilities where inmates became test subjects.
The prisoners were told they were participating in medical research. They weren't told the research was designed to develop torture techniques. 12 pharmaceutical companies, including Eli Lilly, Sandoz Laboratories, and others. These companies provided massive quantities of LSD and other drugs. They knew the substances were destined for human experimentation. They supplied them anyway, receiving government contracts in exchange. 3 foreign governments: Canada, United Kingdom, Japan. CIA operatives established secret detention centers in these countries to conduct experiments that would be illegal on U.S. soil. The foreign governments provided facilities and looked the other way. The financial records show at least $10 million spent, likely much more. In current value, over $100 million. But money is a poor measure of MKUltra's scope. The true measure is human suffering. Conservative estimates, at least 7,000 servicemen and women used as unwitting test subjects. Tens of thousands of civilians, prisoners, patients, addicts, prostitutes, the homeless, the mentally ill, children. Possibly hundreds of thousands if you include people dosed in public places without their knowledge. The CIA admits to none of this officially. When pressed, officials say, the destroyed records make comprehensive accounting impossible. Translation: we did so much to so many people that even we don't know the full extent. The scientist who created LSD. 1938, Basel, Switzerland. Dr. Albert Hofmann, chemist at Sandoz Laboratories, synthesizes lysergic acid diethylamide. It's the 25th compound in his ergot alkaloid research series. He labels it LSD-25. The substance shows promise in animal testing, but human trials are delayed. World War II intervenes. The compound sits in storage. April 16, 1943, Hoffman accidentally absorbs a tiny amount of LSD through his skin. He experiences strange sensations, restlessness, dizziness, visual distortions. He goes home, lies down, and experiences what he later describes as a kaleidoscope of colors, geometric patterns of incredible beauty. 3 days later, he deliberately ingests 250 micrograms, what he believes is a threshold dose. It's actually 10 times larger than necessary. He experiences the first documented LSD trip. Terrifying, overwhelming, reality-dissolving. He survives. When he recovers, he recognizes the substance's potential. Sandoz begins marketing LSD in 1947 as Declassified, a psychiatric medication. Doctors prescribe it for various conditions. Researchers study it. Psychologists explore it. And the CIA takes notice. In the early 1950s, Sidney Gottlieb approaches Sandoz. He wants to purchase the world's entire supply of LSD,
10 kilograms.
Sandoz refuses to sell him everything, but agrees to provide substantial quantities. Hoffman learns years later what the CIA did with his creation. In interviews before his death in 2008 at age 102, he expresses profound regret. "I produced LSD to be a tool for psychiatric research," he says. "Instead, it became a weapon. The CIA used my compound to torture people, to destroy minds. This was never my intention. I am deeply sorry for what was done with my discovery." But Hoffman's apology is unnecessary. He created a tool. The CIA decided to weaponize it. The blame lies with those who chose to use LSD for torture, not with the chemist who discovered it. LSD itself is neutral. In therapeutic settings with proper support, it has helped people overcome trauma, addiction, depression. In CIA hands, administered without consent to terrified subjects, it became an instrument of psychological annihilation. The drug didn't create monsters. The CIA did. The Tokyo Experiments. 1951 through 1956. Camp King, Oberusel, West Germany. The CIA establishes a secret detention center in buildings formerly used by the Gestapo during World War II. The irony is deliberate. The CIA recruits former Nazi doctors to advise on interrogation techniques. These same doctors conducted experiments in concentration camps. Now they work for American intelligence, teaching what they learned in Dachau and Auschwitz. The detainees at Camp King are suspected Soviet agents, captured spies, defectors deemed unreliable. They're held without trial, without access to lawyers, without notification to their embassies. They disappear into Camp King and emerge destroyed, if they emerge at all. The experiments focus on combining drugs with interrogation. Prisoners receive LSD, mescaline, barbiturates, amphetamines, sometimes in combinations. They're questioned for hours while drugged. If they resist, dosages increase. If they still resist, electroshock is added. One detainee, identified in declassified documents only as Subject 17, undergoes 43 interrogation sessions over 6 months. Each session includes drug administration, followed by questioning for 8 to 12 hours. By the final session, Subject 17 speaks only in fragments. He can't remember his own name. He no longer knows what country he's from. The interrogators conclude he was never a Soviet agent. He was a refugee, falsely denounced. They release him. He's found, 2 weeks later, wandering the streets of Frankfurt, unable to care for himself. He's committed to a psychiatric facility, where he remains for the rest of his life. Camp King closes in 1956, when West Germany begins asserting more sovereignty. But the CIA simply relocates the program. New black sites open in the Philippines, Japan, Thailand. In Japan, the CIA recruits scientists from Unit 731, the Japanese Biological Warfare Division that conducted horrific experiments on Chinese prisoners during World War II. These scientists bring expertise in human experimentation. They advise CIA researchers on techniques to maximize psychological damage while keeping subjects alive for continued questioning. Documents declassified in 2004 reveal that at least 23 detainees died in CIA custody during MKUltra-related interrogations at foreign black sites. The deaths are officially attributed to interrogation complications or underlying medical conditions. The bodies are never returned to families. They're cremated or buried in unmarked graves. The CIA defends these operations as necessary for national security. Cold War threats justified extreme measures. The detainees were enemy agents or suspected terrorists.
Their rights were subordinate to American safety. Except many weren't enemy agents.
They were refugees, dissidents, people in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were detained based on rumors, denunciations, mistaken identities. And once in CIA custody, they became experimental subjects, regardless of their actual guilt or innocence. The aftermath for survivors. Linda McDonald, Cameron's patient, spends decades attempting to rebuild her memory. She keeps notebooks documenting basic facts about her life. She looks at family photographs daily, trying to remember the people in them. She never fully recovers. In interviews in the 1990s, she describes living in permanent confusion. I know these people are my family because they tell me they are. I know I had a life before the treatments because there are photographs, but I don't remember. I have memories from age 6 and before. Everything else is gone. I am 45 years old, but my last real memory is from childhood. She dies in 2004, having spent 40 years trying to remember 30 years of lost life. Whitey Bulger, the gangster, dosed with LSD in prison, experiences nightly hallucinations for 60 years. In letters to juror Janet Uhler, he describes the nightmares. Every night, when I fall into deep sleep, the walls start breathing. Colors drip like liquid. Voices speak from nowhere. This has been every night since 1958. I've never had a peaceful night's sleep in 60 years. He fears having children, believing the LSD damaged his chromosomes. He never marries. He writes, "What if my children are born damaged? What if they suffer because of what the CIA did to me? I could never forgive myself." Bulger becomes one of Boston's most notorious criminals. He's responsible for 11 murders, countless beatings, years of terrorizing South Boston. After his conviction, some wonder, would he have become this person without the LSD experiments? The question is unanswerable. But one juror, Janet Uhler, states she regrets voting to convict him on the murder charges after learning about the experiments. Bulger dies in prison in 2018, beaten to death by inmates. He was 89 years old, still having nightmares, still broken by what was done to him 60 years earlier. Subject 12, the mentally disabled boy who received 14 doses of LSD, disappears from records after the experiments. His current status is unknown. His real name is unknown. He's a footnote in a destroyed file. The Kentucky prisoner who received LSD for 174 consecutive days. No records exist of his identity or fate. He exists only as a number in congressional testimony. 174 days. 174 doses. Then, nothing. Jean Steele, Cameron's patient, spends 30 years in an infantile state. She can't care for herself. She can't remember her children. She writes nonsense codes on walls. She dies in 1997. Her daughter says, "The woman who raised me died in 1957 in that sleep room. The person who lived in her body for 40 more years was someone else. Someone broken. My mother never came back." Thousands of other victims remain anonymous. The destroyed records guarantee they'll never be officially recognized. They live or lived with trauma, memory loss, psychological damage. They sought help and received torture. They trusted their government and were betrayed. No comprehensive victim database exists. No memorial lists their names. No museum documents their suffering. They're erased twice, first by the experiments, then by the destruction of evidence. The question of accountability. 0 CIA officials have been prosecuted for MKUltra crimes. 0 researchers have been charged. 0 doctors have lost their medical licenses. 0 universities have faced sanctions. 0 pharmaceutical companies have been fined. Richard Helms, the CIA director who ordered the destruction of evidence, died in 2002 at age 89. He faced no consequences for obstruction of justice. He received a full CIA funeral with honors. Sidney Gottlieb, the chemist who directed MKUltra, retired to Virginia where he raised goats and volunteered at a leper colony. He testified before Congress under immunity. He expressed regret that the experiments didn't work as intended, but defended them as necessary for national security. He died in 1999 at age 80, never having been charged with a crime. George Hunter White, the agent who ran Operation Midnight Climax, died in 1975 from cirrhosis. He never testified. His diaries were donated to a college library where they sat unexamined for years. When finally reviewed, they detailed his enthusiasm for dosing unsuspecting civilians. "Fun, fun, fun," he wrote. No one ever held him accountable. Donald Ewan Cameron died in 1967. He was president of World Psychiatric Associations, honored by colleagues, respected internationally. His family destroyed his personal papers after his death. He never faced questions about his CIA funding. He never answered for the lives he destroyed. None of them went to prison. None of them paid fines. None of them even lost their security clearances or pensions. Why? The government invoked several defenses. National security. MKUltra was classified. Prosecuting officials would require revealing classified information. National security takes precedence over individual justice. Good faith. The officials believed they were protecting America. They acted in good faith within the knowledge available at the time. The ethical violations, while regrettable, were not criminal intent. Sovereign immunity. Government officials performing official duties are immune from prosecution unless they intentionally violate clearly established constitutional rights. In the 1950s and 60s, the constitutional status of human experimentation was unclear. Therefore, no clearly established right was violated. Statute of limitations. By the time MKUltra was exposed in 1975, too much time had passed. Most crimes have 5-year statute of limitations. 20 years later, prosecution was legally impossible. These are legal arguments. They're technically valid. They're also morally bankrupt. MKUltra was not a good faith mistake. It was a decades-long program of systematic torture disguised as research. The officials involved knew they were breaking laws. That's why they hid the programs behind front organizations, destroyed evidence, and lied to Congress. The victims deserved justice. They didn't receive it. The perpetrators died free, comfortable, honored. The victims died broken, forgotten, uncompensated. This is how America handles its crimes. Acknowledge enough to appear transparent. Apologize enough to appear contrite, but never actually punish the guilty. Investigations without indictments, hearings without charges, apologies without amends. The message is clear. If you work for the government, if you invoke national security, if you destroy evidence quickly enough, you can commit atrocities with impunity. The cultural impact. MKUltra becomes conspiracy theory shorthand. The program was real, but its exposure spawns countless unfounded theories. People claim the CIA controls celebrities, politicians, mass shooters. They cite MKUltra as proof. These theories obscure the actual, documented crimes. When someone says MKUltra, listeners often respond with skepticism. They've heard so many false claims that they doubt the true ones. This benefits the government. Flooding the zone with misinformation makes legitimate exposure easier to dismiss. That's just another conspiracy theory, people say, not realizing it's documented fact. The cultural legacy divides into two streams. First, the counterculture movement. Ken Kesey, Robert Hunter, Allen Ginsberg all received their first LSD through CIA-funded experiments. They experienced the drug's consciousness-expanding effects and shared it with others. The hippie movement, psychedelic rock, the 1960s counterculture all have roots in MKUltra. Sidney Gottlieb accidentally sparked a revolution. He wanted to weaponize LSD for interrogation. Instead, he introduced it to artists and writers who used it for enlightenment. The CIA tried to control minds and inadvertently inspired a generation to expand consciousness. Second, the surveillance state. MKUltra's real legacy is normalizing invasive government control. The program established precedents. Citizens can be experimented on without consent if national security requires it. Evidence of government crimes can be destroyed to protect intelligence operations. Officials who commit atrocities can avoid prosecution by invoking classified information. Victims of government abuse have no practical recourse for justice. These precedents didn't end with MKUltra. They continue in the NSA's mass surveillance programs exposed by Edward Snowden, the CIA's torture program at black sites after September 11th, the FBI's COINTELPRO operations against civil rights activists, IC detention centers where children are separated from families. Different agencies, different methods, same principle. Government power supersedes individual rights when national security is invoked. MKUltra appears in films, television shows, novels, video games. Manchurian Candidate assassins, mind-controlled sleeper agents, CIA super soldiers. The fictional versions are dramatic and entertaining. The real version is banal and bureaucratic. There were no superhuman abilities created, no minds successfully controlled. Just broken people, destroyed lives, and a government that shredded the evidence. The international victims. Canada's victims eventually receive compensation. The United States victims do not. But what about victims in other countries? The Philippines. CIA black sites operated in Manila from 1953 to 1964. Detainees brought there for interrogation simply vanished. No records were kept. No bodies were returned. In 2006, a Filipino woman contacts human rights organizations. Her father, arrested in 1959 on suspicion of being a communist spy, was taken to an American facility and never seen again. She has his arrest record, but nothing after that. The CIA has no record of him in their declassified files. Dozens of similar cases exist. Fathers, brothers, sons disappeared into CIA custody, never released, never accounted for. Their families received no death certificates, no explanations, no bodies to bury. Japan. The CIA partnered with Japanese intelligence agencies to establish interrogation facilities. Former Unit 731 scientists advised on experiments. The detainees were Chinese, Korean, and Soviet nationals captured along Asian borders. One survivor, Kim Sung-il, captured in 1954 along the Korean-Chinese border, tells his story to a human rights investigator in 1998. He was held for 18 months in a facility outside Tokyo. He was injected with substances that made him violently ill. He was interrogated for days without sleep. He was shown photographs of his family and told they would be killed if he didn't cooperate. He had no information to give. He was a farmer who crossed the border illegally seeking work. The interrogators eventually realized this. They released him in 1956, warning him never to speak of what happened. He remained silent for 42 years. How many others like Kim Sung-il exist? Unknown. The CIA doesn't discuss foreign black site operations. West Germany. After Camp King closed, detainees were transferred to other facilities or released, but some simply disappeared. German officials in the 1990s attempted to investigate, requesting records from the CIA. The requests were denied on national security grounds. At least 12 men, possibly more, entered CIA custody in West Germany and were never seen again. Their families assume they're dead, but without bodies, without records, without confirmation, they can't even mourn properly. These international victims have no recourse. They're not American citizens. Their governments at the time cooperated with the CIA. Decades later, their governments claim they were unaware of the full extent of CIA operations on their soil. They offer no compensation, no investigation, no acknowledgement. The victims exist in limbo. Officially, they don't exist at all. The University's complicity. 86 universities received CIA funding for MKUltra projects. Most claim they didn't know the money came from intelligence agencies. The front organizations, Human Ecology Fund, Geschichte Foundation, and others, appeared legitimate. But did the researchers truly not know? Consider the experiments. Testing LSD on patients without informing them. Conducting electroshock at dangerous voltages. Keeping detailed records of psychological breakdowns. Using prisoners, mental patients, and children as subjects. Publishing results in classified reports, not academic journals. Did the researchers believe these were normal medical studies? Stanford University received funding for LSD experiments. Ken Kesey participated as a volunteer test subject. He was paid $75 per session. Stanford claimed the research was studying perception and consciousness. The study was actually testing if LSD could be used for interrogation enhancement. Did Stanford's Institutional Review Board not notice? Harvard University received funding for psychological experiments. Researchers tested stress responses by subjecting undergraduate students to brutal verbal attacks, then monitoring their reactions. The study was supposedly about debate skills. It was actually testing if psychological breakdown could be induced through aggressive questioning. Did Harvard's ethics committee approve this? University of Rochester conducted radiation experiments combined with LSD administration. Subjects were given radioactive calcium, then dosed with LSD, then monitored. The purpose? Determine if drugs could enhance radiation interrogation techniques. Did Rochester's medical school not question this protocol? McGill University's complicity is undeniable. Donald Cameron was on their faculty. His experiments occurred in a McGill-affiliated facility. Approximately 80 patients were destroyed. McGill knew. After MKUltra was exposed, universities claimed innocence. They released statements. Our researchers believed they were conducting legitimate medical research. The CIA funding was not disclosed to us by the front organizations. We have reviewed the experiments and found no intentional violations of ethics policies. We regret any harm that may have occurred. Notice the passive voice. Harm that may have occurred, not harm we caused. The universities distance themselves from responsibility. No university has offered direct compensation to victims experimented on in their facilities. No professors have been sanctioned. No research grants have been returned. The institutions benefit from CIA money, allow the research, claim ignorance when exposed, and continue operating as before. Harvard, Stanford, Yale, MIT, Columbia, Cornell. These are America's elite institutions. They're supposed to embody ethical research, academic integrity, respect for human subjects. Instead, they partnered with intelligence agencies to torture people in the name of science. And they faced no consequences. The modern implications. MKUltra officially ended in 1973. But did the research actually stop? Consider. In 2003, the Bush administration authorizes enhanced interrogation techniques for terrorism suspects. These techniques include sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation, stress positions, waterboarding, exploitation of phobias. These are MKUltra techniques. The Kubark Manual, derived from MKUltra research, provided the blueprint. Psychologists James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen designed the enhanced interrogation program. They consulted research on sensory deprivation, learned helplessness, and psychological breaking points. Research conducted during MKUltra. In 2014, the Senate Intelligence Committee releases a report on CIA torture. The report documents that at least 39 prisoners were subjected to enhanced interrogation. At least 3 died in custody. The techniques produced false confessions and unreliable intelligence. The Senate report cites psychological research from the 1950s and 60s, MKUltra era research, as the basis for enhanced interrogation methods. In 2021, reports emerge of Uyghur Muslims detained in Chinese re-education camps. The camps use forced drugging, psychological manipulation, and sensory deprivation to erase ethnic identity and install compliance. Chinese officials deny this is happening, but the techniques described are familiar. They're from the MKUltra Kubark playbook. Torture methods perfected by the CIA in the 1950s are now used by authoritarian regimes worldwide. The research never ended. It was declassified, published, and adopted globally. Within the United States, prisons use long-term solitary confinement, MKUltra's sensory deprivation technique, on thousands of inmates. The effects are identical: hallucinations, cognitive breakdown, permanent psychological damage. It's called administrative segregation now, not an experiment. But the results are the same. Psychiatric facilities use physical restraints and forced medication on patients. The justification is treatment. The reality is often behavioral control through chemical means. Exactly what MKUltra attempted. Law enforcement uses sleep deprivation during interrogations. Suspects are kept awake for 24, 48, 72 hours until they confess. The technique works. It's also torture. It's also derived from MKUltra research. The methods are normalized. They're standard operating procedures. MKUltra's legacy is making torture routine. Chapter 23. The Children Who Survived. Most MKUltra child victims remain unidentified, but a few have come forward. Carol Rutz, born in 1946, claims in her book A Nation Betrayed that she was used as a child subject in CIA experiments. She describes being taken from her family in Ohio, transported to facilities where she was drugged, abused, and subjected to trauma-based conditioning. She has scars, medical anomalies, and fragmented memories that support her claims, but she has no documents proving CIA involvement. The CIA has no record of her. Therefore, officially, her abuse didn't happen.
Chris Denicola, testifying before the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments in 1995, describes being used in government mind control experiments as a child in the 1960s.
She recalls being taken to a military base, given injections, subjected to electroshock, and interrogated. She has physical scars. She has medical records showing unexplained gaps in her childhood documentation. But she has no records proving CIA involvement. The CIA has no record of her. Therefore, officially, her abuse didn't happen. Dozens of others have similar stories. They remember fragments, they have scars, they have nightmares, but they have no proof because the CIA destroyed the records. The government's position: without documentation, these people are delusional, seeking attention, confusing false memories with real events. Their testimony is dismissed. But consider, if the CIA admitted to experimenting on adults without consent, why would they draw the line at children? If they admitted to destroying evidence, why should we believe their claim that no child experiments occurred? The absence of records proves nothing. The CIA destroyed the records. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence when evidence was deliberately destroyed.
The children who survived live with doubt. Did it really happen? Or are their memories false? The government ensures they can never know for certain. This is additional torture, denying victims the validation of acknowledgement. The psychiatric establishment's silence. The American Psychiatric Association made Donald Cameron their president in 1952, while he was conducting experiments that destroyed patients' minds. They honored him as a leader in the field. After MKUltra was exposed, the APA released a statement expressing regret. They didn't revoke Cameron's honors. They didn't investigate other psychiatrists involved in MKUltra. They didn't establish new ethical guidelines to prevent similar abuses. The American Psychological Association had members who participated in CIA interrogation programs. After the enhanced interrogation scandal, the APA conducted an internal review.
The review found that APA officials had cooperated with the CIA and Department of Defense to create ethics policies that accommodated torture. The APA apologized. They revised their ethics policies. But they didn't revoke the licenses of psychologists who designed torture programs. James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, the psychologists who created enhanced interrogation techniques, continue to hold their professional credentials. The medical establishment protects its own. When doctors conduct experiments that harm patients, the profession responds with, "The research was consistent with standards of the time. The individuals acted in good faith. We have updated our ethics policies to prevent recurrence." These are the same defenses the CIA used, the same defenses the universities used. Everyone claims good faith. No one faces real consequences. But medical ethics didn't emerge after MKUltra. The Nuremberg Code was established in 1947, 6 years before MKUltra began. The code explicitly requires informed consent for human experimentation. It was created specifically to prevent the type of abuse that the CIA then committed for 20 years. MKUltra's doctors violated existing ethics. They knew they were violating them. That's why the research was classified. The psychiatric establishment could have condemned this forcefully. They could have expelled members involved. They could have cooperated fully with investigations. They didn't. Instead, they protected their professional reputation at the expense of victims' justice. The final body count. How many people were destroyed by MKUltra? No one knows. The CIA claims 7,000 servicemen and women plus an unknown number of civilians.
But these are conservative estimates based on fragmentary records. Consider 149 subprojects. If each subproject involved 100 subjects, a conservative estimate, that's 14,900 people. 86 universities and institutions. If each conducted experiments on 50 people, again conservative, that's 4,300 people. Operation Midnight Climax operated for 10 years. If 1 man per week was dosed, absurdly conservative, that's 520 people. More likely dozens per week, meaning thousands. The Kentucky Addiction Center ran for approximately 15 years. Hundreds of prisoners cycled through. The experiments continued continuously. Foreign black sites operated for over a decade in multiple countries. Detainees arrived constantly. Some died. Some survived. Few records exist. Cameron treated 80 people through depatterning. But he ran the Allen Memorial Institute for over 20 years. How many other patients received lesser treatments that still caused harm? And then there are the people dosed in public places, restaurants, bars, beaches, by CIA operatives testing how to administer drugs covertly.
George White's diary mentions dosing people whenever opportunity arose.
How many opportunities arose over 20 years? Reasonable estimates. At least 50,000 people were directly affected by MKUltra programs. Possibly 100,000. Possibly more. The dead. At least 2 confirmed, Frank Olson and 1 researcher who died during an LSD experiment. But the 23 deaths at foreign black sites, and the unknown number of subjects who committed suicide years later due to psychological damage, and the unknown number who died from medical complications during experiments. 50 deaths? 100? More? The destroyed records guarantee we'll never know. The psychologically destroyed. Thousands. Linda McDonald, Gene Steele, and the other Cameron patients who never recovered. The Kentucky prisoners who developed permanent psychosis. Whitey Bulger and other Atlanta inmates with lifelong trauma. Subject 12 and other children who never developed normally. The foreign detainees who returned home, broken. The walking wounded, tens of thousands. People who survived with flashbacks, memory loss, anxiety, depression, PTSD. People who don't know why they're damaged because they don't know they were experimented on. The families. For every victim, multiply by 4 or 5. Spouses, children, parents, siblings. Hundreds of thousands of people affected by having a loved one destroyed by their own government. This is MKUltra's true cost. Not the $10 million the CIA spent. Not the international embarrassment when exposed. The cost is measured in destroyed lives, broken families, lost potential, and permanent trauma. And the government considers this acceptable. When Admiral Turner testified in 1977, he called MKUltra regrettable and inappropriate. Not criminal, not evil, not a moral catastrophe. Inappropriate. As if dosing children with LSD is a social faux pas rather than a crime against humanity. The truth no one speaks. Here is what the government will never admit. MKUltra was not about national security. It was about power. The CIA wanted the ability to control anyone, enemies, allies, citizens. They wanted to erase dissidents, reprogram defectors, create assassins, extract information, and destroy threats. MKUltra was not a product of ignorance. The researchers knew they were torturing people. They documented the suffering. They noted when subjects became suicidal, psychotic, catatonic. They continued anyway. The suffering was the point. They were measuring how much suffering it takes to break a human mind. MKUltra was not an aberration. It was policy. The highest levels of government approved it. Presidents knew. CIA directors knew. Congressional oversight committees knew, or deliberately looked away. This was systematic, intentional, endorsed. MKUltra did not end in 1973. The techniques live on. The research is consulted. The methods are taught. Only the name changed. MKUltra will happen again. Without prosecutions, without institutional reform, without genuine accountability, there's no deterrent. Government officials understand they can commit atrocities and face no consequences if they invoke national security and destroy evidence. The victims are not respected. They're obstacles to be managed with settlements and non-disclosure agreements. They're embarrassments to be discredited. They're footnotes in history books. Their suffering matters less than protecting the CIA's reputation. Justice will not occur. The perpetrators are dead. The institutions remain. The methods continue. The victims are forgotten. And this is acceptable to America. We know what happened. We know who was responsible. We know the crimes were never punished, and we accept it. That acceptance is MKUltra's final victory. The present day. October 28, 2025. Present day. Some MKUltra victims still live, now elderly, still carrying trauma from events that occurred 70 years ago. Linda McDonald would be 99 years old if she had lived. She died in 2004, having never recovered her memories. The Olson family continues seeking truth. Eric Olson, Frank's son, maintains a website documenting his father's murder. He is 82 years old. He has spent 50 years investigating. The government has never admitted Frank was murdered. The case remains officially closed as unknown circumstances. The building at 225 Chestnut Street stands unchanged in San Francisco. It's worth over $15 million now. The current owners likely don't know their luxury apartment was once a CIA safe house where hundreds of men were drugged and studied. The Allen Memorial Institute still operates in Montreal. The building where Cameron conducted his experiments is gone, demolished. The current institute does not acknowledge its history. There is no plaque, no memorial, no public acknowledgement of what occurred there. The CIA headquarters in Langley has a memorial wall honoring agents who died in service. There is no wall acknowledging Americans killed by CIA experiments. There never will be. In university archives across America, MKUltra documents sit in boxes marked Project MKUltra, Declassified. Students occasionally request them for research papers. They read about the experiments with academic detachment. The victims are abstractions, historical figures, subjects of study rather than human beings who were tortured. The 7 boxes of financial records that survived Helms's purge are now digitized. Anyone can read them. They contain payment receipts, expense reports, grant allocations. They're the accounting ledgers of atrocity. Numbers representing destroyed lives. Sidney Gottlieb's obituary in 1999 described him as a chemist who led the CIA's program of experimentation with psychoactive drugs. No mention of torture. No mention of deaths. No mention of destroyed lives. Just experimentation. George Hunter White's diary sits in a university library in California. Researchers occasionally quote from it. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest? They quote it as an example of Cold War mentality, not as a confession of crimes. Donald Cameron's name appears in psychiatric textbooks in sections on depatterning and psychic driving. The techniques are discussed clinically as interesting but flawed approaches to treating mental illness. The textbooks rarely mention that the techniques were torture or that Cameron destroyed 80 people's minds while believing he was curing them. The techniques live on. Guantanamo Bay still operates.
Black sites still exist. Enhanced interrogation is rebranded as necessary counterterrorism. Solitary confinement is standard practice in American prisons. Forced medication is routine in psychiatric facilities. MKUltra never ended. It evolved. It became normal. It became policy. And no one was ever punished. And no one ever will be. And that is the final horror.